Good afternoon. On behalf of AAE Board Member and Director of Professional Development, Neil Otto, it's my pleasure to welcome you to another webinar hosted by the American Association for Employment and Education. Today's topic is Reimagine Hiring, Onboarding with Purpose. My name is Tim Newbert, and I serve as AAE's Executive Director. Please allow me to cover just a few housekeeping matters before we begin with today's topic. During the webinar, all attendees will be muted by default. However, today's settings will allow you to activate your video and, if desired, unmute your microphone to ask questions or share comments. You may also use the chat feature within Zoom. When using chat, you are encouraged to change the recipient default to all to maximize participation, or I think it's everyone. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available to attendees and AAE members. If your organization is not a current member of AAE, please visit our website, aaee.org, to learn more about our activities and resources. We are a professional association intent on positively impacting education through professional connections. Related to that mission, we connect the three critical groups involved with the preparation, recruitment, and retention of PK-12 educators: university professionals and others who prepare educators, school assistant professionals, and others who recruit, hire, and retain them, and of course, educator candidates themselves. We offer annual publications such as the Job Search Handbook for Educators. We conduct an educator supply and demand survey each fall and winter, resulting in a spring report. We co-host the careersforeducators.com job board with Kappa Delta Pi. We host webinars such as this one on topics relevant to our membership. We sponsor teacher scholarships and school system mini grants to support teacher pipelines. We host teacher job fairs, both in person and virtual. We co-host a national working group on teacher retention with Upbeat. And we host an annual conference and education career fair each fall. Our next event will be held in Louisville, Kentucky from October 26th through October 28th, starting just 2 months from today. How can you set new hires up for success? Determining the initial competencies you want your new teammates to focus on as they get started in their new role can help them find early success. Today, we'll talk about targeting strategic short-term goals with new hires and how to make the most of your onboarding process. We're joined today by Daniel Johnson and Justin De Leon from Education Elements to lead us in this discussion. Thanks for joining us today, Daniel and Justin. I'll now turn it over to you.
Wonderful. And thank you, Tim, and thank you to AAE for inviting us to this third part of our series. It's been a privilege for us to meet with members, but also share our ideas around, in this case, onboarding and also hiring in the previous two sessions. As we are checking in, and Daniel and I will share a little bit more about ourselves momentarily, but as we're checking in, if in the chat, or if you'd like to come off mute, just share your name, your district, or your organization and your role, and reflect on a group, organization, or business you felt connected to upon first interaction. So think about a different team maybe, or a business, or if you started at a new job where pretty quickly you felt connected to them upon a first interaction or an early interaction. So take a minute to think about that. And as you're doing that and reflecting, Daniel and I will introduce ourselves briefly here too. So I'm Justin De Leon. I'm a partner with Education Elements. I'm based in Miami, and I work with districts mostly in the Southeast, but across the country, solving issues and challenges around teacher recruitment and retention, and also designing and implementing different strategic initiatives with school districts, such as making learning more student-centered. And a group or organization that I felt connected to upon first interaction, kind of a weird answer, but I feel connected to Courtyard Marriott's. No matter where I go, I'm always like welcomed in, and they're very clear about where I can eat, you know, what time everything is open, getting me hooked up with water when I first get there. And that was from the first time I started traveling with Ed Elements, like still to today, although we're not traveling quite as much as we used to. But I appreciate the intentionality behind how they train and develop their staff to welcome guests. Daniel, how about you?
Thanks, Justin, and made a lot of great relationships at Courtyard Marriott that we've been visiting along the way. My name is Daniel Johnson. I'm an associate partner with Education Elements. I live and work out of Washington, D.C., and I worked in school systems in Mississippi and New York City before joining Education Elements about 7 years ago. Primarily support schools and districts across the East Coast with building more responsive practices, and with Justin and other team members co-lead our recruitment and retention service line. So excited to be here with you this afternoon. And actually, I recently joined an ultimate Frisbee club in Washington, D.C. I was looking for something to do to get active. And it was a bunch of people who've been playing for quite some time, and they really made a point of emphasizing that they were welcoming to all levels of play. I had really no experience. This was the first time for me. Everyone made a point to introduce themselves and remember my name when I came back the next time. And there was a big emphasis on equal play time for people of all levels. So was a group I joined recently that I just felt immediately connected to, and it made me want to come back and continue.
Thanks, Daniel. And so I see we have a couple more participants here with us. So if anybody would like to come off mute and introduce yourself, we'd love to hear from you, or just share in the chat and say hello, and a business or a group or a team like Daniel, maybe you're into Ultimate Frisbee too, that you felt connected to upon like your first interaction or an early interaction. And thank you, Deetra, for introducing yourself in the chat. I see you're joining us from Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, and yes, okay, be connected to that district too. Thank you. Anyone else like to share before we move on? You can share in the chat too if you'd like to say hi. All right. Well, it's nice to see some new faces in the group, and Daniel and I will continue. And we're thinking about this question because onboarding can be many things. Much of how we think about onboarding at Education Elements, and perhaps how many of you do too, is creating a welcoming environment, creating an affirming environment, and helping people feel connected, like Daniel was describing his experience with Ultimate Frisbee, and that team who welcomed him back, right, and called him by name the next time he returned. Those are the sorts of feelings that we want to create when we're onboarding people and new teachers and educators. But we also want them to be effective and competent in their roles as well. So today we're going to be walking through that and what that looks like. If you're newer to Education Elements, we have been helping schools and districts and organizations from state education agencies to small rural districts and all sorts of groups in between and nonprofits for the past 10 years. And we really believe that schools grow when people grow. And our mission is really to transform schools and districts. And much of that happens, if not all of it, through the people and how people are developed and cared for. So Tim, you already broke down some of our Zoom norms, so I'm gonna skip that. But I will say that we do have a couple of spots here in our session where we'd like to open it up for discussion and reflection from you. And so please feel free to come off of mute at those times. And at any time, share questions or reflections in the chat. In terms of objectives, there's 3 things that we'd like to accomplish today. One is to touch on the way onboarding impacts retention. And then we're going to walk you through a framework for thinking about onboarding and helping to reflect on the current state of your onboarding experience. And then finally, think about ways that you can personalize onboarding and develop new skills and new capabilities through that process based on data that you might collect from hiring or shortly thereafter. All right, so, excuse me. So what we see here in this, in this image, we see a teacher walking down the hallway. This new teacher just started at this school. So they should probably have a mask on, actually. I gotta talk to my illustrator about that. But the teacher's walking down the hallway and thinking, right, a couple of days into the job, is this the right place for me? Am I really feeling like I belong here, or will I feel like I belong? Am I going to be successful in this new role? Because that matters to me deeply. We know that when new hires join, if they're seasoned veterans in the classroom or brand new to education, or maybe changing jobs or changing roles, that as much as districts and organizations are trying to invest and sell a new hire and invest them into the school that they're going to be working at or the organization, even after onboarding, that person is still evaluating their choice and reflecting, right? And so all the different onboarding interactions and touch points are opportunities to affirm their decision or to detract from it. So thinking about each interaction, the intentionality behind how onboarding is designed, in ways that you could help new hires feel a greater sense of belonging and feel successful by developing them through the onboarding process is what we're here to talk about today. Couple of like interesting stats I'll just share with you. And this is across a number of industries, but there was a survey by Allied Workforce Mobility, that survey, and there's some interesting things that gave me some pause and kind of rationalize some of our thinking around how we design and how we think about onboarding. Part of it is like efficiency with onboarding. And so only 30% of companies report it takes a year or longer for a new employee to reach full productivity. About a quarter of companies said their onboarding program did not include any kind of training. So meaning it's a lot more compliance-based or paperwork-based to get people through the checklist, make sure they're compliant, and then they move on. And 60% of companies indicated they don't set any goals or milestones for new hires. So thinking about over half, and this is in corporate sector and different nonprofits, but think about a school or a district, right, or an education organization that you support. About do you have milestones in place? Is there goal setting, right, and is there that kind of planning going into helping employees reach full productivity? A couple other stats here before we move to some reflection. This is from a different source, SHRM, which probably many of you are familiar with. About 69% of new hires are more likely to stay at a company for 3 years or longer if they have a great onboarding experience. So we know that data tells us if we put some more intentionality and effort into what the onboarding experience looks like. So thinking about that teacher walking down the hall, if they feel a greater sense of belonging, if they feel successful, they're more likely to stay. And those early initial experiences in the new role are very impressionable. Another statistic here, 67% of job seekers agree that their onboarding experience will affect their decision to stay more than 1 year. So this is people who are considering a role change and looking for a new job, and have the perception is that like onboarding definitely impacts their experience and then the likelihood for how long they'll stay. So just a couple of ideas here and stats to spark some thinking. What we wanted to do is just take a minute and pause. Thinking about the current state of your onboarding experience. What about it do you think makes teachers want to stay? What are you doing? Or what are your peers or your colleagues doing? Or maybe if you're not currently in a role where you're interacting directly with new hires, what do you think it is that makes teachers want to stay in the early parts of an onboarding experience or throughout the onboarding experience? Go ahead and share in the chat, or you're more than welcome to come off mute and share your ideas here. Thanks, Bianca. So you're sharing about new teacher orientation. Definitely, right? Like, so having some structured time, and as you're pointing out, connecting all new staff members together. So feeling that sense of like camaraderie, connectedness with other peers, knowing that you're not alone is really powerful, right? Like people you can connect to after new teacher orientation and continuing into the teachers rest of their time in the school or district. Other thoughts? Oh, it keeps getting better with a cookout at the end. So you keep adding here. Yes. What's interesting about that too is having the cookout, right? Through new teacher orientation, there might be like some programming and workshops, and then that peak moment, right, where people have like a really nice experience at the cookout, can unwind a little bit and connect more informally. That's wonderful. All right, Franco. So new teacher orientation, but very personalized. That's great to hear. So your new teacher orientation was very personalized, and you work closely with your principal during the onboarding process too. That's excellent, right? So that high touch relationship building, right, with the principal, taking you in. I'm assuming like giving you some feedback and guidance along the way, but just knowing that you have that one-to-one connection with your principal, and that the principal's invested in you. That's wonderful. Thank you, Laura. All right, Tina, we need to revise our process, right? So you have new hire orientation, but it's not encouraging, right? It falls in the compliance stage, not training that encourages people to be excited. So Tina, thank you for being vulnerable and just naming that and sharing that. I think when you take a longer view at onboarding too, people definitely have similar realizations. So hopefully you can walk out of here with maybe an idea or two to spark your thinking. And so Laura, you're reflecting too about there used to be more paperwork, right? So how that has changed. Thank you to everybody who took the time to weigh in and share. These are very thoughtful and quite a range too, right? From like new teacher orientation, moving from paperwork to more of a high touch experience with onboarding, and also what's tough about it, and how it's very real, and sometimes we do need to revise the process. Okay, so we'll keep it moving. We'll have two more kind of stop and pause and reflection points along this. So what we're going to do now is share a framework for onboarding design. So the idea here is it's a tool that can help you reflect on where your onboarding and the different activities within your onboarding experience fall, mostly to give you some language to use and kind of have a common language with your peers, but also to give you a perspective and a way to structure your thinking around onboarding. So there's a framework here where I'm going to break this down into a few different parts. The first part of onboarding, and how one way you can think about onboarding is through these different levels. So passive, high potential, and proactive onboarding. Essentially, like depending on the types of activities that you have and that are included in your onboarding design and your onboarding strategy, you're probably going to fall into one of these three rows. Passive being mostly compliance driven, and some role clarification. High potential, a mix of those two, but also you begin to be exposed to culture and the connections. So the kick out, cookout, say that 5 times or 3 times fast, but the kick out, cookout, that's a wonderful example of understanding the culture of the district, right? Understanding the culture of the people in the organization. And it's a ritual in and of itself that builds culture. And also getting a chance to make connections with other people and other people who might share similar characteristics or traits or identity as you. And then finally, kind of moving down is, which is most desirable, is this proactive strategy level. And that's where, yes, you have those compliance-driven and role clarification activities, but the emphasis is really on helping to expose the organizational culture and making connections and building, I'm seeing the correction on the kickoff. I still like kick out, cook off, whatever it is. Now I'm getting my brain mixed up. But the last one is really about building culture and making connections with other people. And that's really where the majority of the resources, time, and energy are put into. So picking up on those 3 strategy levels, and then thinking about it in terms of different activities, right? So what I'm showing you here is the different levels of onboarding and how the activities within those levels help to determine your strategy. All right, so there's a lot going on, but let me break this down for you. So we just looked at our 3 strategic levels. those are determined by the types of activities you have. So our teachers mostly signing new paperwork, going through their onboarding checklist, like getting the keys to the classroom and a tour. That's all that's really happening, right? Then you're going to be falling more into compliance-based activities, in which case it's a more passive strategy, in which case you're developing teachers who are a bit more transactional. That's just a descriptor to help with teams, again, align around language. And we're going to unpack what each of these teacher types mean: transactional, operational, and influential. Whereas if you move down right towards proactive, you see how activities that are more clarify your role. For example, as a teacher, you're expected to administer assessments in this way and join PLCs. And this is what it means to contribute to a PLC and participate. And you're expected to help out with different hallway or lunchroom or extracurricular duties. And this is what it looks like to do that. So helping people to know not just what happens in the classroom, but different aspects of the role of a teacher or different staff members in the school. And then we have, again, culture and connective activities where you're helping to expose what are some of the rituals, some of the norms in the school, how do people plug into those and participate, and then doing that through connections with others. Again, like the cookout, it could even be during staff meetings, right? It could be during team meetings, but exposing different ways and what that can look like. So we're going to kind of unpack this a little bit, and then we're going to stop again for another pause. Okay, so when we're talking about passive onboarding and transactional teachers, really what I mean by transactional teachers are, those are teachers who, they are in compliance. The way that their onboarding experience is designed is not necessarily developing them, helping them to build relationships, and most of all, it's not necessarily positioning them to be most impactful with students and students' achievement. So a more passive onboarding strategy results in like some, or is composed of sample activities like this. So you're looking at the handbook, you're signing your paperwork, you get your tech, you get your books, you might get a tour, you might meet a mentor, but there's no real structure or intentionality behind how you're interacting with your mentor. Moving up here to high potential. Right? So this is a more operational teacher. So this is a teacher who they're beyond compliance. They understand some of the core best practices at the school, for example. They know that a certain curriculum is expected of them because of their role or instructional materials. They understand that like differentiation is a core part of their job because that's what the school values. Right? And some of those some of that is possible because of the activities that are included in their onboarding. And they may be very much like existing things in the school, but still plugging them in. So professional development planning, that might mean like setting a PD roadmap or development roadmap with the new hire. Invitations and participation in staff meetings. These seem like small and obvious things, but sometimes in an onboarding process, that might not be set up and it might not be made obvious. And so as a new hire, I'm like, am I supposed to go to that department meeting? Because I'm an English teacher, but no one invited me. Or am I supposed to be at that 7th grade team meeting? I'm not sure, because I have mostly 7th grade, but I also have 6th grade students. Little things like that, they all add up to like making me feel more confused or making me feel more clear about my role and how I plug into the school. There might be some coaching and feedback and some feedback loops, but kind of intermittent, right? So as a new hire, I might not have that predictability and know, okay, I know I've got my weekly meeting with the principal. They're going to give me some feedback on my walkthrough and help me kind of think about a couple of problems of practice I'm having. And then finally, being introduced to a range of staff members and attending school functions and events. But you might not get roles at those school function and events, right? And somebody might not be taking you in and being like, okay, Justin, we want you to do this at the cookout. We want you to do that at the back to school night, and helping you to kind of find your footing. All right. And the last level here is in the spirit of developing influential teachers. So teachers who are in a much better position to impact student achievement because they feel like they belong in the school, and because they feel like they have access to opportunity to develop, and because they have access to other peers who can help them. But that's all built on, they feel clear on their role as well, and they're in compliance. So you see how all these things build upon each other. So that might look like co-creating my PD plan, with a coach, right, or a principal. Really intensive support based on data. So if I'm coming in as like a mid-career teacher, I've been at it maybe like 7, 9, 10 years, and I have like very strong classroom management, but I'm like not so strong on data and analyzing data and grouping students. In my onboarding process, somebody being able to name that and coach me on that specifically, especially if I'm going into a school where like that, that's a priority, that would be something that would be really helpful. Some very clear and ongoing feedback and coaching. And also some sort of affinity group where I can connect with teachers outside of my school or in the school, ideally, who share some sort of affinity with me, whether that's like how I identify, where I am in my career, whatever the case may be. And then, of course, different ways to connect and co-plan with peers. That might be formal, informal, and participation in playing an active role in staff and school-based events. So not just being there, but inviting people in to contribute to those as well. All right, I'm going to come back to that view and to the framework, but I wanted to stop and pause here, and we'd love to know some of the activities that you shared and maybe some others that you didn't yet. In what buckets do they fall? So thinking about those different types of activities. Thinking about the different onboarding activities, in what buckets do they fall? So thinking about compliance, clarification, culture, connection, in your onboarding experience. I tried to kind of make some connections as I was going through. I know there's some a couple more things shared. Yeah, Tim, thank you for that. And thank you for naming that onboarding should be, right, and is a part of a district's retention effort. Whether that's named explicitly and acknowledged or not, it is a part of the retention strategy, right? And why not take advantage of that? The other thing too is if you think about the cost of recruiting and hiring and finding a new teacher, and then the cost in terms of like people hours of developing that new teacher until a point where they're effective, it doesn't make as much sense, right? Just from like a pure business standpoint, to onboard more people when it makes more sense to invest in onboarding. Thank you for that. I'm just going back over to the chat too, and I'm seeing, looking at some of these other activities. But anyone is welcome to share here too. Some of your onboarding activities, where do they fall in terms of these levels? So we've got, okay, Caroline, I'm going back to your comment. I don't think I saw it earlier, that the teacher ambassadors in Polk. That's excellent. So that would be more around like culture and connection too, right? But those people can serve in a role clarification capacity too. Okay, Tina's sharing, most of what you do is compliance driven. And so Tina, like hopefully this gives you some way to kind of reflect with some of your peers too and call that out, right? And it gives you a starting point to think about other types of activities and other ways you can design the experience. We're going to get to some more tactical ideas in the next section too. All right. So know that this is here, like previous sessions, we'll make sure you get these slides, but I encourage you to use this as a tool to help you reflect, to align your team around language and like the different strategy levels, and the different activities of the levels of onboarding. So Bianca, you're talking about how we're consistent with clarification, inconsistent, sorry. Yeah, and what we've learned and what we know too is that from like central office to the individual schools, there can be so much variance, and oftentimes the handoff, like the point of handoff from like the new hire goes from HR staff in central office to the school principal, and depending on the district, sometimes the school principal is the one who really does the hiring or their teams, but often with the districts, handing off to the schools, there isn't a ton of information also that's shared. And Dana's going to talk about that in a second, how like the candidate profile, right, and different competencies that people are coming in with. And then on top of that, right, there's inconsistencies, Bianca, with what you're naming too, on how roles are clarified, because the expectation aren't as clear at the site level. Franco, thank you. Yeah. So you're kind of elaborating more on what your onboarding experience has been like, a mix of high potential and proactive, which is very positive to see. And really because, right, your principal was intentional about PD planning, showing you and exposing you to those opportunities and like building your awareness, right, and giving you some of that personalized support. And Bianca, that's an interesting call out too. You have a big turnover with hires the late hires that don't go through your pre-planning. So that affirms the statistic we showed earlier around, the extent to which people stay or don't stay depending on the type of onboarding experience that they have. Excellent. Thank you for sharing. And again, for each of you for just honestly sharing the realities, both positive and critical. We're going to switch gears a little bit here. Yes. After I reload the slides here. All right. So, okay, so we're going to move on. I'm going to pass it over to Daniel. So we're going to move on from our framework and go to make a connection to hiring and the candidate profile and competencies. Daniel, I'll pass it over to you to walk us through this.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. And a lot of what was shared there, I think, is very similar to what we hear when we talk about this across the board, that onboarding oftentimes, I think, depends on the principal at the school. We hear that from the central office quite a bit. And so I think just a good first step here is to think about how you are norming as an organization, whether you're a 2 or 3 school district all the way up to 100 schools or something like that, about the importance of onboarding, its connections to retention, and the ways in which that progression that Justin has shared live. And then the other thing I would just emphasize is how do you think about that beyond the first day or the first week? How do you think about that over the course of the first full year of an employee's life cycle in your organization? So I think once you start to break it down at that level, there's rooms and opportunity for growth, really in every organization. So we wanted to connect this with the series that we've been going through. This is actually part 3, and these were meant to be standalone, but also interconnected. So if you have had an opportunity to come to one of the previous sessions, we talked a lot about getting really clear on your candidate profile and the ways in which you interview and recruit along that profile, so that you have the information you need to create a strong onboarding system. So that the strengths, that the areas of growth for your new employees in a real structured way, and that is very clearly connected to what you need from your employees. So this was a slide we've looked at in the past that talks about the 2 types of competencies you should be thinking about within a profile and within the way that you interview and structure your hiring process. So the first are foundational competencies. These are skills, knowledge, abilities, mindsets that exist regardless of role. So these are kind of organizational values or attributes that any employee in your organization should hold. Some examples there: teamwork, initiative, communication. And then functional competencies. So the specific abilities or skills within the identified role itself. So now we're looking at the teacher or the coach or the principal. So examples, and we're using teacher examples here, lesson planning, instructional coaching, behavioral management. So looking at really specific skills that are tied to the role itself. We can go to the next slide. We think about this, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. So we recommend getting that list where you can down to about 8, and thinking about that 1/3, 2/3, 1/3 foundational, 2/3 functional. And the reason for that is typically functional are going to be more potentially coachable skills, and they're also going to be more directly related to the day-to-day functions that you need from day one. But 1/3, 2/3 is kind of the general breakdown there. And then again, what we've talked about in the last two editions of this series is really how you think about seeking out and evaluating so that you have the data you need for where a candidate is when they begin along those competencies. And we'll go to the next slide here. Is that the next slide? Yeah, that is the next slide. Yeah, that is the next slide. So when we think about this along onboarding, you can kind of bucket those. So functional being in compliance and really in clarification. So clarifying and skill building along the day-to-day responsibilities, the day-to-day skills. And then your foundational being more along the mindsets or organizational habits that you want to see from your employees. So when you have that data of a new hire and you're looking at what's come out of their hiring process, thinking about the ways in which those competencies are getting developed across those onboarding structures that you have in place. So this can be a way of organizing the data that comes out of the structured hiring process so that you have a really intentional plan for every employee. And this will allow you to better differentiate. You can bucket employees in different kinds of profiles. You can get more clear on the ways in which, again, their readiness on day one is being applied in their onboarding. And we'll go to the next slide here. And so this is actually, just give you a peek into our own, we try to practice what we preach on this, but these are actually the attributes we assess for consultants coming into our team. And you can see, we've broken those down along what we see as foundational and functional competencies. And then when a candidate does, or when a new employee does come in, we have a general sense of the attributes that they're coming in really ready to go on and attributes that we see as areas of growth. And again, we're a small, maybe would be the size of a mid-size or a mid-size school in terms of the number of employees we have, but it really allows us to get clear over the course of their first year. These are the set attributes that we're going to target for those employees. So happy to talk a bit more on that as we go here, but wanted to make some connections here around where we've been in this series and where we are as it relates to the onboarding process that we hope it builds into. And Justin's going to talk a little bit about that year progression.
Yeah. Yes. And thank you, Daniel. And stay with me for a sec too, because I'm going to connect a few different ideas to try and bring us home. The first is, Tim, to your observation or your reflection rather about onboarding being a point in time. We're on the same page, right? We think of onboarding as not a point in time. New teacher orientation is a point in time, which is situated within a longer onboarding experience. So if we think about onboarding as 6 to 9 months, sometimes longer, depending on, Daniel just showed us that capabilities kind of scorecard, depending on the development that I need. Really, that's what should be driving it, not compliance or, well, this is how we've been doing onboarding for X number of years. Let me kind of orient you to this view as well too. So what you're looking at here, Daniel, you just walked us through the functional and foundational competencies. And the idea is, as time goes on, right, and the teacher is getting more settled and clear, you want to be working on more of those foundational competencies. Get the basics in place, i.e. your functional competencies. Do that, take care of that. Those are important to get people on their feet. We need people to know how to do those transactional compliance-driven things so that they are in compliance. We need people to know and be very clear on their roles. But we don't want to stop there. We don't want to set the bar just there. We want to push through and graduate beyond that, which is why you see, as time goes on, you see how this might be like with my mentor, I'm going over setting routines and procedures for my classroom for opening of school. I'm learning about classroom management at NT at New Teacher Orientation. I might do some lesson planning, right? Or like my mentor meeting with setting high expectations. But really, like these first couple of activities are really about some of those foundational pieces that I need just to be in compliance and like know what I'm supposed to do at the school. Whereas when time goes on, I'm getting more sophisticated in the types of activities. This is just an example, right? To help you kind of think about and map out what the different interaction points are and how each of those is an opportunity to develop people intentionally or not, like in the context of their onboarding. So you see over here, right? Social emotional learning and developing that growth mindset and how you do that. That might happen during new teacher orientation, but we're just showing you a way how the foundational skills can become more sophisticated, right? Once the teacher has some of the basics in place. And then on the y-axis here, it's also about moving from compliance to more connection-based activities. So we do need to start with compliance, right? That doesn't mean you can't do connective activities on day one and then minute one. We're just helping you to kind of have a framework to think about, how do I organize all these interactions? How do I use onboarding as a way to personalize a new teacher's development? And then also, how do I do that in a way where they feel connected to others so that they feel a sense of belonging and are more likely to stay, that they feel that they can plug into the school and the school community. So, just a view to help kind of bring a number of ideas together and hopefully make it feel more tangible to help you see how you can personalize onboarding. As Daniel mentioned, using some data, right? Like from a candidate scorecard, and yours probably will look different, right? But you could use something similar to this. And if that candidate profile is not a part of your current hiring process, you can do that, right? As part of one of your initial onboarding interactions, is helping to, even if it's through reflection, right? And asking teachers to self-reflect. It gives you data to personalize. So we're going to stop here. Our last question: how much use candidate profiles to personalize onboarding? Or what else might you do to personalize onboarding? That's really what the question in the spirit of this is about. I'm catching up the 6 to 9 months versus 6 to 9 hours. That is poignant and sadly true in many cases. So I've learned, so in two of our discussion questions, I think everyone's reflecting and typing now. That's been the pattern so far in our session. No pressure, no pressure. If you're like, I'm good, Justin, I get it. And feel free to come off mute too. But really the question is about going back to the theme of this section of our discussion. How might you use candidate profiles to personalize onboarding? Or just more broadly, how else might you personalize onboarding? Be more targeted with how you're developing people and in the spirit of retention. And as you're thinking, here we go. So, okay, Franco, following that trend is helpful. Yeah, okay, that's a great call out. I appreciate what you're saying about onboarding not being linear, right? Like how there's going to be some ups and downs. So I appreciate you calling that out. And Tina, you're talking about 6 to 9 hours is what you have presently. Broader kind of up-leveling your onboarding and just new hire orientation being a part of that, right? It's an interaction and a very important and critical part, right? But onboarding is a bigger process than that. Thank you for that. Yeah. Yeah, Bianca, I hear you on that, right? Like it feels like an extra thing, right? Or the mentor programs. But really, and we can share more about this, but when you have those different groups like that, the power of the human connection and the relationships when people are deciding, do I want to stay or do I want to leave? That's a huge influencing and deciding factor, which can be developed through those affinity groups. A lot of times it's informal though too, right? Sometimes you'll just happen to make friends at a school, but that doesn't always happen. And so like, how can we by design increase the likelihood that people make those connections? Yeah, Tim, that's also true in many cases, right? It's like, okay, we found your person. Here you go. That's the handoff. We're not going to tell you anything about that person, but there's their resume. So you're going to have to figure out how to develop them and figure out what onboarding looks like, right? We did our new teacher orientation. Our job here is done, right? Yeah, exactly, right? Our job here is done. until you call us in a couple of months and tell us that that person left, and then, you know, here we are back at square one. And so, right, that does beg the question too, is like, how can HR leaders collaborate with principals, collaborate with school leadership teams, and kind of co-design this process together and get onboarding to be a more consistent practice and thinking about it longer term across the district. Totally. Totally. Yep. Everyone must have a hand in that. And you know, one thing Daniel, you and I didn't talk about a ton or much in this presentation, this session, is, Tim, what you're pushing on, which is like helping people to understand roles and accountabilities. That's a different part of this. But like after you build something like this, right, and you could map out something like this with your team, that could be like a 30-minute exercise where you're kind of plotting out different points. A next step would be, okay, great, now who owns what, and getting clear on roles and accountabilities. So some project management pieces, but you can see here, right, this grade level team planning, that's one group. Whereas, you know, and this might be with my English language arts department, right? Whereas like I have somebody else who's the mentor. All these things seem obvious, but why not just document it and make it clear for the new person so they know exactly who to connect with? Some teachers are stronger and more comfortable reaching out and navigating the ambiguity and are happy to speak up and raise their hand, but some people aren't because they're in a new environment. So how can we make that more clear? All right. It looks like our comments, our reflections are slowing down a little bit, and we're coming up at the hour. So we are planning a hiring and onboarding institute for mid-November. Daniel and I are like working out some details in the kinks, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to get people together. But we'll see. So we'll, you know, Tim, we can share that information with you if that's something interesting to any of you. We'll be sharing that. Awesome. And that is all for us. We're happy to hang out and stay on the Zoom line for a couple minutes if you have any questions. Daniel just shared the closing survey. So if there's anything else you'd like to talk about, we're here. But please give us feedback. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy days to meet with us and hopefully learn. And you're walking away with something useful that challenges your thinking. And again, we appreciate your time. And thank you, Tim, for including us. We're very grateful to you and AAE.
Thank you so much, Justin and Daniel. Really appreciate it. Just want to draw people's attention to, I did drop into the chat. If you did not see the one or both of the previous Reimagine hiring presentations, discussions that Daniel and Justin and Baltazar from Education Elements had shared, those recordings are on the AAE website under webinar series. So please do check those out. Also want to just highlight here that September 15th will be the next AAE webinar. Felicia Norwood and Toy Tanton from Prince William County Public Schools are presenting what to change immediately to recruit and retain diverse candidates. Certainly, you know, traditionally recruiting season is you know, in the spring and early summer, right? But those times they are changing, unfortunately. So hopefully that's as relevant and of as great of interest in mid-September as it would have been in the springtime. So hopefully you'll join us for that. And again, want to thank Justin and Daniel so much for today's presentation and discussion. And thank you all for coming.
Excellent. Thank you again, Tim.